wanted to ask locals in New Zealand to reflect on the mosque attacks in Christchurch on March 15th, 2019. Has this attack been forgotten? Could such a tragedy bring any positives? Did the attacks affect the non-Muslim community? 15 days, 15 videos, marking the 2-year anniversary of the day that shook New Zealand. This is what they had to say. Do you remember where you were and how you felt when you first heard about the Christchurch attacks?
Yes, I was sitting in this office, and as news first came through, it was disbelief. I assumed that there must have been some sort of an error made. I did not believe anything like this could happen in New Zealand, and as the reality hit home, it was horror.
I was at Police National Headquarters, and I remember it quite vividly, as I had just finished a meeting and I was showing a guest out of Police National Headquarters, and I got a call from one of my police colleagues informing me about it. I remember feeling quite numb and quite distressed upon hearing the news, and I immediately then started planning for our police response, which was specifically our community response to the shooting.
Oh, I remember vividly. I was with the Prime Minister. We were in New Plymouth. We were launching our hydrogen roadmap. We'd just been to the climate strikes. I'd left our launch of the hydrogen roadmap and gone back to New Plymouth Airport when I started receiving reports of it. It was straight away trying to ring people that I knew would be at Friday prayer at the mosque. Obviously couldn't get hold of people, and then I think that hour-and-a-half flight with my phone turned off was one of the longest hour-and-a-halves of my life, actually. I got home, spoke to the Prime Minister. We talked about her coming down the next day, whether that was going to be feasible. At that point, there was still a lot of uncertainty around the security aspects, and then we started planning for what was going to happen. I spoke to a friend of mine who is an elder at the mosque and talked about the possibility of the Prime Minister meeting with the communities the next morning, and also spoke to Gamal that evening as well, the Imam from Al Noor, about the possibility of the Prime Minister coming down and really wanting to gauge from the community whether this would be support or a burden. What we didn't want to do as a government was to place more burden on a community that was obviously just reeling.
Would you say that xenophobia or intolerance is something that's common in New Zealand?
No, I wouldn't. And I guess there's always, in any culture, there's always people having different feelings, strong feelings, and unfortunately some unpleasant feelings about certain parts of the community. But I wouldn't say that that was something that was conscious in New Zealand until the events in Christchurch, and I think it was in part a wake-up call to New Zealanders to realise there are some evil people out there.
Barring a few people who still continue to hold some terrible views, barring that very, very small majority, everybody felt like they wanted to do something. I got so many messages from people saying, how can we help? Where can we donate? What can we do? We just want to demonstrate how much sadness we have for the community and how we want to let them know that they are in our hearts. And I think I'm so proud of my city and I'm proud of my country at the way we responded. I cannot say enough about the people of Aotearoa about how they responded. It was magnificent, and yeah, very proud of that. It makes me very emotional to think that, it takes such a terrible event to happen, but it did, and it demonstrated the best that people can be.
Say that post 15th March, xenophobia and racism has become much more heightened. People are more aware of xenophobia and racism. I think xenophobia and racism has always been there in New Zealand. It's just become much more visible since 15th of March.
I don't think we can deny that intolerance exists in Christchurch or in New Zealand. Intolerance is something that each and every one of us has to ensure that we're doing but on a daily basis to make sure we're building the kind of inclusive communities and societies that we want. I don't think that tolerance is the opposite of intolerance. I don't think we should ever just tolerate people. That's not the way I think that we build the kind of society and neighbourhoods and communities that I envision. It's about celebrating, it's about understanding, and I think that actually friendships are one of the most important things about building inclusive neighbourhoods and communities. It's getting to know each other as humans, I think, is the really important thing. It's not about, once a year that you have a multicultural festival and people go and watch people dance and sample food. That's really good and really important and something that we should do, but I firmly believe that it's actually friendships and human interactions that will build the kind of understanding and inclusive kind of New Zealand that I want to live in.
Have you ever directly or indirectly witnessed any Islamophobic or racist behaviours before or after the event?
I think the only thing that we've seen is the recent events of a misguided young person here in Queenstown who went around putting up slogans and posters and things. That's the only direct activity I've seen.
I work closely with our ethnic communities in New Zealand, our Muslim communities in particular, and unfortunately, both prior to the 15th of March and after the 15th of March, we have seen numerous incidents that have involved our Muslim community. Shockingly, it has also involved family members of victims from the Christchurch shootings.
Intolerance in New Zealand. Being a Pacific Island woman in a city that is quite monocultural, I have experiences myself of where people, don't behave as well as they should be. And yes, I think it's not expected, but it does happen. I think we have to recognise that there are people who are fearful because they don't understand. And, coming from the Pacific community that in its own time had struggled to integrate well into New Zealand society. I think we know it happens, and I think we do everything we can to deal with it. But there's always going to be opportunities of challenge that come up. But I think as a nation, we are quite grown up in understanding that this exists and looking at ways to deal with it.
Do you feel that the way in which Muslims are viewed, represented and treated has changed in New Zealand since the happenings of March 15th?
I think since the 15th of March, there has been an outpouring of people wanting to understand Islam and the Muslim community better. I think the communities have reached out to one another to better communicate, to dialogue, to appreciate the harmful effects that hate speech and racism and discrimination can contribute to. And I think these are the important steps that New Zealanders, the vast majority of New Zealanders, are taking to better understand and acknowledge our Muslim community.
I have to say what I'm really excited about is how engaged particularly this Christchurch community has become with the Muslim community, how much more understanding, we are much more open to talking about the different ways we do our faith, for example, and food, and the Muslim leaders are much more engaged in local politics. You may know that we have several members of the Muslim community who are now involved in community boards and the like, which is really great. Really just so impressed at how well the Muslim community have let us in after March 15. I have to say that there have been such awesome messages of acceptance and peace and just warmth from the community themselves out to the wider community. Muslim messages of peace and fellowship and brotherhood are what really sealed the deal for our society. You know, you express as, you know, part of your faith, willingness to accept everyone, and that came through loud and clear, and many of us have taken the opportunity to explore what that means and become much more involved with members of the Muslim community.
I think there have been some changes in the media. I think that there were some journalists locally who had to really stop and take stock of how they'd been reporting on the mosques and our Muslim communities. There had been, not long before that, some controversy about the City Council creating times when Muslim ladies could go and swim. That it was the pools were available. It was times when the pools would otherwise be closed. It wasn't putting anyone at any kind of inconvenience. But you know, there'd been the usual kind of flare up of why one group, and I know that there were some local journalists that took stock and thought, well, I really need to think about the way I talk about this. I need to think about the way in which I report this. I think that it is a constant project, as it is with any kind of institutionalised way of thinking about things. There had been a tendency, I think, for the idea of extremism to be seen from one side, and that was coming from our Muslim communities. I think the fact that the extremism came in a form of hatred towards those communities was something that made not just the media, but people all across the city and the country really have to take stock and to start reframing in their thinking about what hatred and extremism looked like, and it wasn't certainly confined to a religion.
Do you feel that the way the public media portrays and represents Muslims has changed?
I think news agencies such as Stuff, who ran their media series acknowledging racism and discrimination in the past, was an important step in order to acknowledge the contributing factor that media can play in shaping the important discussion about racism and discrimination. What has been very positive to see is the numerous members of our Muslim communities, both young and old, getting the opportunity to talk to media, to have their opinions heard, to share their insights. And that has been invaluable to see our communities themselves talking about themselves rather than having other commentators speak on their behalf.
Do you believe that there were any positives that came out of this event?
Yeah, I think locally here, council's relationship with the Muslim community has warmed and become much more active in the way we are thinking, whereas before we said, oh yes, there's a Muslim community here. Now I think we're much more embracive. I think if there's one positive that's come out of this, it's the realisation that we're not all the same, we don't all have the same beliefs, but we need to be tolerant of everybody's beliefs. Nobody is right, nobody is wrong, we all have different beliefs.
I think lots of positives. Expressions of unity, of wanting to engage much more fulsomely, protection and safety, and feeling like a community that we can get through anything if we do it together. In terms of being a legislator and a member of Parliament, what's positive too is that we've been able to change some of our laws to ensure, as far as we can, that this tragedy doesn't happen ever again for any community, and that's hugely positive. We were able to act really quickly because we had the whole community behind us saying, yes, this needs to happen. The first responders and their response, I think, was pretty extraordinary. As I said a bit earlier, the Prime Minister was here within 24 hours in Christchurch, and one of the things she did was to go to the Justice Precinct and talk to the police. At the Justice Precinct we had the Navy, the Army, we had all of the first responders in one place, and she was able to talk to them, and we were able to find out just how quickly everybody reacted. I know conversely that behind the scenes there were some things that we could have done better that may have prevented this from happening in the first place. However, it did happen, and I think the response was extraordinary to be able to stop this man before he was able to, do any further damage. He was, on his way somewhere, and to be able to stop him within, the short amount of time that they did was nothing but, extraordinary. The hospital just taking the injured and working with them so quickly, and just, I spoke to a young chap who was actually from Dunedin. He was someone that was known to the Dunedin members of Parliament, and they asked me to check how he was, and he was just talking about how quickly he was seen and dealt with, and how much care he had been given, and he was looking to get his mother here from Dunedin too. We were able to support him to do that.
I mean, I'm the kind of person that thinks you always do have to look for the positives, even in the darkest of situations, and this certainly was one of the darkest events in our city and our country's past. The fact that a terrorist attack that was just founded in hatred like that happened, not that far from where we're sitting today, I think is something none of us ever expected to see in our lifetime. But if I am to think, well, it's happened, what are the things, the opportunities that we need to take from it? I think it is that we do have stronger connections between our Muslim and non-Muslim communities. I think that it's also that it's given the rest of Christchurch and the rest of New Zealand an opportunity to learn and see what Islam is about, and the fact that these are people living their lives in our city, kids going to school, they're going to work, their religion is hugely important to them, but fundamentally they are our brothers and sisters, they are our neighbours, and it is, as the Prime Minister said, we are one people. To respect and celebrate the difference, but also to find those points of commonality, the things that bind us together as humans and as New Zealanders. I think the fact that it demystified and gave people a chance to see Islam that perhaps they hadn't before, and I think that building those bridges has been vitally important, and something I think one of the legacies that we all have a responsibility to ensure that we keep doing, that we keep building these strong connections, that it's not a them and us, it's an all of us kind of situation. Look, I do think that the idea of us coming together was something that has happened. There's so many beautiful stories from the last 2 years of just those moments, they're very personal moments often, where kindness and acts of kindness have been executed from both sides. I think one of the things that a lot of people who aren't members of our Muslim community have just been in complete awe of is the love and the gentleness in which the Muslim community have also approached trying to rebuild after this. My electorate, as I said, our Noa is in the Wigram electorate, the electorate I represent, so a lot of people who go to that mosque live in the suburbs surrounding it in my electorate, just where my electorate office is, in a small corner of Hoon Hay within a 500 metre radius. There were 4 families that lost someone on that day. So it is very personal and it is very close, I think, in a city the size of Christchurch in terms of the distance from the tragedy and how close people are. There was a point in time where there was just a constant supply of baklava to the office. It was never without a plate of baklava. So I think that togetherness and that unity hasn't just been about acts of kindness from our non-Muslim community to the Muslim community. It's about the extreme kindness we've seen flowing back the other way as well.
There's words that are called cold comfort. And the cold comfort that anybody can take from this is that many of our communities have now found their voice, and that has been important. I think there has been where our communities have basically stated that they want to be heard, they want their opinions to be heard. their voice matters, and that has come through very, very strongly. I think there's a much deeper acknowledgement about hate and racism and discrimination and the effect that can have. This has come more to the fore, where this is more openly discussed. Prior to the 15th of March, there was much debate and discussion about whether there is racism and discrimination in New Zealand. A sense of false security that this was not occurring. Many prominent New Zealanders were talking about race and discrimination, and in some cases they weren't believed, or it wasn't acknowledged about the scale of it. So I think since 15th of March there is a greater awareness about race and discrimination. The 15th of March demonstrated an outpouring of compassion and empathy with our Muslim communities. Caused many New Zealanders to stop and to reflect about their place in our country and their actions, and what type of a society we all want to grow up in, we all want to live in. And I think that the events of 15th of March will resonate well into the future in shaping how we treat one another.
Look, post the event, I think I'll reflect back on my feelings at the time, which, as I said, were feelings of horror. I still can't quite get my head around the fact that that happened in New Zealand. We've always been such a safe country that these things just don't happen here. And so if there's a message I wanted to give to the Muslim community, it is that you are part of us and you are part of our community. I don't see Christians, Muslims, Jews any different than any I don't see any difference, and that's the way we should treat each other.
What do I want to say to the wider community? I think, as a person who lives in this community so closely attached to particularly the Linwood Islamic Centre, I just want to thank you personally for calling me sister and opening your arms to us and allowing us to do what we needed to do on that day, which is wrap our arms around you. It probably wasn't easy, considering what a difficult time you were going through, and it would have been easy to just kind of withdraw within yourselves as a community, but you did not. You opened your arms to us, and we were able to embrace you. And to the wider Christchurch community, thank you for being those arms that wrapped around our Muslim brothers and sisters, not only on that day but in the years since, and continuing to do everything you can to integrate them into our society as fully participating members of the Aotearoa New Zealand society. And the more that we learn, the more that we can embrace and enjoy each other and all of our wonderful sameness and our wonderful difference as well. Extraordinarily hopeful for the future that this has been a chance for us to reset and think about the values that we hold most dear, which are, love, peace, compassion, and understanding. And thank you for allowing me to be part of this.
I think if we're going to take anything out of this terrible tragedy and what it means for the future, because I think that is what we owe each of those people that lost their lives or were injured on that day, is to be thinking about the future and how it is that we can build a better world because of what happened. It's really an understanding that this isn't just a single moment in time. building the kind of world that we want. It takes constant effort from all of us to make sure that we're continually on a journey of trying to understand each other more and find those common factors in humanity. Respecting the way people dress is talked about in the way in which our police have made moves to be more inclusive, making sure that we've got ways in which we can have people from different communities come in and be part of all parts of our society. But this doesn't happen by accident. It takes leadership, not just from politicians and prime ministers. That is important. And I think our Prime Minister showed that leadership over the last 2 years, but it takes individual leadership from each of us every single day to make sure that we are building that kind of world. And I think if New Zealand's got anything to teach the world coming out of this, we didn't know what to do on the afternoon of March 15. We'd never experienced anything like this. But actually, it was going back to being a good human. What is it that you should do when you want to care for people, when you do want to actually just be empathetic to a tragedy that is going on around? It wasn't about, how is this going to be perceived politically? It's about what should I do to extend the kind of comfort that a community required in the face of such a tragedy.
My role on the 15th of March was to support our police response to the tragedy. And what that meant was that I immediately contacted a group of Muslim community representatives. I left for Christchurch that evening on the 15th of March with our Deputy Commissioner of Police. In and amongst this tragedy, we knew that families would need information. They would need to have personal briefings. There was also the arrangements that would need to be made in order to culturally and religiously look after those that were martyred and those family members that were injured. What counts in life is not the mere fact that we have lived, but it's the difference that we have made to the lives of others that will determine the significance of the life we have led. This is a quote from Nelson Mandela. I grew up in South Africa and his presence cast a long shadow. And I always reflect on these words because it states that there has to be a higher purpose to your contribution that you make. And I think that the contribution our Muslim communities have made to New Zealand, as well as those that were tragically lost, have contributed significantly to shaping the future for New Zealand. A future that is one that is based on equality, that is based on respect, that is based on understanding. It is a place where all New Zealanders can live peacefully. The sacrifices and the tragedy out of 15th of March demonstrates that commitment that all of us can make to a more peaceful and just New Zealand. I also want to add that the choices that we make going forward need to be choices that we make out of hope, not choices that we make out of fear. And the hope that has been evident right across our communities has been one where they want to work together for a better nation, for a safer New Zealand, and for a safer world. And for that, we acknowledge and we thank our Muslim community